Hey everybody, ready to tackle a topic most folks like to avoid.
Yeah.
Well, today we're going to dive deep into death.
Sounds a bit morbid, right?
Maybe a little, but we're going to skip the whole doom and gloom thing
Yeah.
and look at it from like a totally different perspective, a yogic perspective.
Ah, interesting.
Right. Think less, hospital beds and more like, well, you'll see. We're using this text here that makes some pretty out there claims. Like, get this. It says you can actually smell death coming.
Smell death. Really?
Yeah. And it says there are signs someone's about to kick the bucket, like little hints you can pick up on.
Hmm.
Oh, and it totally flips the script on how we think about suicide. So are you feeling intrigued yet?
Definitely intrigued. I'm already questioning everything I thought I knew about death.
That's the point, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that really struck me in this text is how it challenges the whole good death versus bad death thing.
Yeah, it talks about timely and untimely death. They actually have specific terms for it, sumrityu and akalmrityu. But here's the kicker. It's not about how old you are when you die.
So what is it about them?
It's about whether you've fulfilled your purpose, your karma.
Okay, wait, hold up. Back up a sec for those of us who aren't exactly yoga masters. What does karma really mean in this context?
Good point. In yogic traditions, karma is like a blueprint you're born with.
Yeah.
It's the set of experiences you're meant to have in this lifetime. And it's not about being punished or rewarded. It's more like a curriculum for your soul. So a timely death is one where you've completed that curriculum.
Regardless of whether you die young or old.
Exactly.
So like if someone dies young, but they really lived their life to the fullest, squeezed every drop out of it, that could actually be a timely death.
You got it.
Wow, that's kind of a radical way of thinking about things. It totally shifts the focus from how long you live to how you actually live.
Right, and it even changes the whole idea of tragedy.
Oh, and the text even has this anecdote about a rich guy who builds this fancy new house and invites a yogi over to bless it.
Oh yeah, I love that one.
So spill the beans. Tell us what happened.
Okay, so the yogi, being a yogi, says, "May your father die first, then you, and then your children."
Whoa. Okay, that took a dark turn.
Right. The rich guy is obviously freaking out. But then the yogi explains that he's simply describing the natural order of life and death, the flow of things, according to this karmic blueprint.
That's intense. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Like maybe we're so busy trying to avoid death that we forget to actually live.
That's a good point.
But this text doesn't just talk about when we die. It also says there are signs that death is approaching, like it's a process you can actually observe. Is that for real?
Yeah, the text really emphasizes that death isn't this sudden event. It's this gradual unfolding. And with the right kind of awareness, you can see it coming.
What kind of signs are we talking about? Like what should we be looking for?
Well, one of the signs is the inability to focus your eyes on the tip of your nose. Apparently, as someone nears death, their gaze starts to wander. They lose that focal point.
Seriously. So if I'm trying to look at the tip of my nose right now and I can't, should I be worried?
Hold your horses, don't panic. It's not that straightforward. The text is clear that these signs need context. There's also a change in breathing patterns. The breath doesn't reach the lower lungs as easily.
So how do you know if it's just tired eyes or an actual sign of, the Grim Reaper knocking?
That's where the yogic understanding of energy comes in. They talk about Agni, which is basically your vital energy, like a metabolic fire. And as we get closer to death, that Agni weakens, and that shows up in these subtle shifts in our physical body.
So it's not just about seeing the physical signs, it's about understanding the energy behind them. I'm starting to see how this yogic perspective adds a whole other layer to how we think about death.
It is a different way of thinking about it. It's about looking at the body and all its processes holistically.
This is reminding me of a story you told about a resident at the yoga center. You said you could sense he was nearing death even though he seemed healthy. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there was this guy, and it was weird. There was just this lack of presence around him, like his energy was already fading. It's hard to explain, but it was palpable. I even found myself kind of ignoring him, even though he was right there.
Wow.
It wasn't until later that I realized what I had picked up on.
That's both fascinating and a little creepy.
Yeah.
I'm sensing a theme here. Death isn't just this physical event. It's an energetic one, too. But hold on, because things are about to get even weirder. The text also talks about how death can be manipulated through negative energies like curses. I'm a bit skeptical, I gotta admit. But tell me more.
Okay, well, yeah, that's definitely one of the more controversial parts of the text. But it basically describes curses as this concentrated negative energy that's directed at someone with the intention to harm or even kill.
It's like a psychic attack. Is that a real thing?
You could call it that.
Yeah.
And the text goes on to say that some people are more vulnerable to these energies than others, like women during certain times of the month are supposedly more susceptible. And it even claims that these negative energies can manifest physically.
Wait, how? Give me an example.
Okay, well, the text mentions blood work abnormalities and says that organs involved in the flow of fluids, like the liver and kidneys, are especially vulnerable. It's like the negative energy messes with the body's natural processes, making it more susceptible to disease or even death.
Okay, now I'm officially creeped out. But if these negative energies are real, how do we protect ourselves? The text must offer some solutions, right?
It does. It talks about the Dhyanalinga, which is a consecrated space that's said to neutralize negative energies. Just being in its presence is supposed to cleanse and purify you. It even suggests visiting on certain days and offering a lemon as a way to enhance the cleansing process.
A lemon. What's so special at a lemon?
I think it's mostly symbolic. In a lot of traditions, lemons are associated with purity and cleansing. The text also mentions the Linga Bhairavi yantra, which is like a smaller, more portable version of the Dhyanalinga, something you can keep in your home.
So basically, periodic energy cleansing, even if you don't think you're cursed or anything, is a good idea. Like taking a spiritual shower.
Yeah.
Exactly. Maintaining energetic hygiene.
I can get behind that. It's making me think twice about the vibes I'm putting out there. But let's switch gears for a bit and talk about something that's tragically relevant today: suicide. The text claims there's been this huge increase in suicides, even though we have more comforts and conveniences than ever before. Why is that?
Well, the yogic perspective is pretty straight up about it. It blames ignorance of life's true nature, like we have these unrealistic expectations, get caught up in the drama of our minds, and forget that ultimately everything is temporary.
That's a hard truth to swallow. I know I'm guilty of that sometimes.
We all are.
The text uses this pretty funny analogy to illustrate this point, right? Something about a salesman and cow dung.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic. So the story goes that this salesman is showing off his fancy new vacuum cleaner. And to demonstrate it, he dumps cow dung on this woman's brand new carpet.
Oh, no.
The only problem is she doesn't have electricity.
Yeah, so the vacuum is useless.
Totally useless. It's this funny way of showing that perspective is everything.
Sometimes you just need a little tomato sauce for lice cow dung, right? But seriously, the text is saying that a lot of times the things that push people to suicide are temporary situations that they feel like they just can't handle, and lists a whole bunch of reasons why people take their own lives. Can you walk us through those?
Sure. The text mentions incurable diseases, extreme suffering, being trapped in horrible situations like war or exploitation, financial despair, societal pressures, even misinterpreting spiritual experiences as a sign that it's time to go.
So many different paths leading to the same tragic outcome. It's heartbreaking. What can we do to help people who might be considering suicide?
Well, according to this yogic perspective, it all comes down to an imbalance at the energetic level. The text suggests that by generating exuberance in our own energy, we can actually uplift others.
So be the light in someone's darkness.
Exactly. Think about how being in a beautiful garden can lift your spirits. Well, emotions are contagious too, and we have a power to spread either exuberance or negativity.
That's a powerful thought, especially these days where negativity seems to spread like wildfire online. But I also think it's important to acknowledge that sometimes professional help is necessary.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue, and sometimes it's beyond what we can handle on our own.
Okay, so we've talked about reasons why someone might choose suicide, but what about the consequences? From a karmic and existential standpoint, what happens after someone takes their own life? Does the manner of death even matter?
The text makes it clear that death is simply shedding the physical body no matter how it happens. It's what happens to the soul, to the subtle body that really matters. And that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
So according to the text after death, the subtle bodies, including the soul, seek out a new physical form. But when that rebirth happens depends on your karma, on how much of that karmic blueprint you've completed. Like, remember that story you told earlier about the woman who committed suicide by jumping into a well? And how you sensed her presence lingering there even after all those years?
Yeah, that was a pretty intense experience.
Well, that story illustrates that it's not so much about how you die, but about the state of your karma and the level of peace and joy you experience in those final moments.
So someone who dies peacefully in their sleep after living a fulfilling life might have a smoother transition than someone who dies tragically, even if it was an accident.
That's what this tradition suggests, yeah. It's not about judgment, it's about the energetic residue that's left behind. And that residue can influence the journey of the soul after death.
Wow, this is some heavy stuff. But it's incredibly fascinating, too. We've covered so much ground already. From what makes a good death to the idea that you can actually smell death, approaching to the complex energetic side of suicide, it feels like we've only just scratched the surface of this whole other way of understanding death.
Oh, we've just begun to dip our toes in. This text also goes into the possibility of predicting death and how even animals can sense it coming.
Seriously. Animals, too.
We'll dive into all that and more after a short break.
All right, sounds good. Hang tight, listeners. We'll be right back to continue our deep dive into death. All right, deep divers, we're back and ready to explore more uncharted territory. Before the break, we were talking about all these crazy ways to sense death approaching, like smell, sight, even animals getting in on the action. But now I'm dying to know, can death actually be predicted? Is this like reading tea leaves or tarot cards or something?
Well, the text takes a more grounded approach, you could say. It says, just like you can kind of guesstimate when a coconut tree will fruit and eventually die based on its age and health, a knowledgeable person can observe signs in a human that indicate they're approaching death. It's all about recognizing patterns and tendencies, not like, fortune telling.
Okay, but you also mentioned something about chopping the coconut tree down early, meaning like some unforeseen event could mess with the prediction. So it's not a guaranteed timeline, right?
Yeah, exactly. Accidents, illnesses, even external events, all these things can throw a wrench in the works and change the course of a life. The text is really clear about this, that predictions are based on probability and free will is always a factor.
So someone could be predicted to die within a certain time frame, but then end up living for years longer.
Totally. It even talks about how solar cycles can influence when death might occur, but that the exact timing is never set in stone.
So it's not like a countdown clock, it's more like a range of possibilities.
Right. And the text goes even further, saying that spiritual practices can also change the trajectory of life, making predictions even less reliable. That's why traditionally astrologers wouldn't make predictions for people who are on a spiritual path.
Why not?
Because they're actively changing their karma, which throws off all the calculations.
That's fascinating. So the more you work on yourself, the less predictable your life becomes. That's actually pretty empowering.
It is kind of cool when you think about it.
But what about us regular folks who aren't reading the stars or meditating for hours on end? Are there any everyday signs of approaching death that we might notice?
The text does mention some subtle changes in the sense of organs that can be indicators, like remember that inability to focus the eyeballs on the tip of the nose we talked about before. That's one. And the change in breathing patterns where the breath doesn't reach the lower lungs as easily is another. These are things people might experience as they get older anyway, but they can also be signs of something more significant.
So basically paying attention to those little shifts in our bodies. But this all sounds super nuanced. How do you know if it's just old age or something more serious?
That's a great question. And to be honest, it's not always easy to tell. The text emphasizes that you shouldn't look at these signs in isolation. It's about looking at the whole picture. It also mentions changes in the body's Agni, or fire element, as a sign of approaching death.
Hold on, Agni again. Can you remind me what that is exactly?
Sure. Agni is a Sanskrit word that literally means fire. In yogic traditions, it refers to the body's vital energy. It's the force that drives our metabolism and keeps us alive. As we get closer to death, this Agni naturally diminishes, and that can show up in different ways physically and energetically.
So it's like the flame of life is slowly going out. That's kind of poetic.
It is.
You know what else is poetic? This next topic. The text claims that animals can actually sense when death is near. Is there any truth to that?
There's definitely some evidence to back that up. Animals, especially those with a strong sense of smell like carnivores, they can often detect subtle changes in a person's body chemistry as death approaches. Like, think about how dogs can be trained to sniff out cancer. It's a similar idea.
So you're saying that you really can smell death. That's both amazing and creepy.
It is kind of wild, right? And the text suggests that even humans can develop this sensitivity with the right awareness and practices. It describes a distinct smell associated with the dissipation of the body's energy, or vayas.
Okay, well, hold up, another new term. What are vayas?
So vayu is Sanskrit for wind or air. But in this context, it refers to the subtle energies that flow through the body. There are 5 main vayas, each with a different function. As death approaches, these vayas begin to dissipate, which can cause changes in bodily functions and even a perceptible odor.
Wow, this is mind-blowing. It's like there's this whole invisible world of energy that we're usually totally oblivious to. But you've mentioned that you've actually seen death approaching too. What does that look like?
It's tricky to explain. The text describes it as this kind of diffusion of the body's boundaries, like the person's physical presence is fading or diminishing. It's subtle, but for someone who's sensitive to those energetic shifts, it can be pretty noticeable.
This is making me think of that story you told about the resident at the yoga center. You sensed he was nearing death, and you didn't even acknowledge him, even though he was right there in front of you.
Yeah, his presence was so weak that I just unconsciously didn't respond to him. And it wasn't until later when I heard he had passed away that I realized what I had perceived.
That's incredible. But it also sounds like kind of a heavy burden to carry, to be able to sense these things. How do you deal with that?
Well, the text definitely advises against sharing these perceptions lightly because it could cause unnecessary fear and anxiety. It's about using that awareness wisely and compassionately.
Right. It's not something you want to just throw around casually. But it does make you think about how much we might be missing out on by not being more present in our bodies and tuned into our senses.
Absolutely. We tend to overlook a whole world of subtle perceptions in our busy lives. And when it comes to death, those perceptions can offer a much deeper understanding of what's really going on.
Well, this deep dive is certainly opening my eyes to that. We've covered a lot of ground already, from the different qualities of death to the signs that it's approaching to the possibility of predicting it, and even how animals and humans can sense it coming. We even touched on the energetic side of suicide and how to protect ourselves from negative energies.
And we still haven't even gotten to what happens after death, especially after suicide.
Oh, right. That's a big one. We definitely need to unpack that. Let's dive into that next. Okay, so we're back and ready to tackle the big question. Here's the elephant in the room. What happens after death, especially after a suicide? This text doesn't shy away from this heavy stuff.
It really doesn't. And it starts by reminding us that death, however it happens, is basically just shedding the physical body. What's really important is the state of the soul, the subtle body. And that's where karma comes back into the picture.
Right, that whole blueprint idea. So are you saying that someone who dies by suicide has a different experience after death than someone who dies from natural causes?
Not necessarily. The text is really clear about this, that it's not so much about how you die, it's more about the state of your karma and the level of peace and joy you experience in those final moments.
So if someone who's lived a fulfilling life dies peacefully in their sleep, they might have an easier transition than someone who dies tragically, even if it was an accident.
That's the understanding. Yeah, it's not about judging, it's about the energy that's left behind. And that energy can definitely affect the soul's journey after death.
Okay, I get that. But I'm still kind of confused about what actually happens to the soul after suicide. Does it get stuck somewhere?
The text explains that after death, the subtle bodies, including the soul, look for a new physical form. But the timing of that rebirth depends on how much of that karmic blueprint you've completed.
So it's like waiting for your number to be called. You hang out until you're ready for your next life.
You could say that, but it's important to remember that the state of mind at the time of death is crucial. If someone dies in a state of fear, anger, confusion, that energy can stick around and make the transition more difficult.
Which is why the text talks about how important it is to cultivate peace and joy in life, even when things are tough. It's not just about dying well, it's about living well too.
Exactly. And that's where your story about the woman who jumped into the well becomes so powerful. You could sense her presence lingering there even after all those years.
Yeah, it was pretty unsettling. And it made me wonder what happens to people who die in such a state of despair.
Well, text suggests that people who die with a lot of unresolved karma, especially negative karma, might have a tougher time transitioning. They might be drawn back to similar situations in their next life, almost like a karmic replay.
Until they learn whatever lessons they need to learn.
Yeah, it's not about punishment. It's about growth and evolution. Karma is about balance and learning, not retribution. Death, even suicide, is just another step on that journey.
Wow. There's a lot to process. We've covered so much in this deep dive. The different ways to think about death, the signs that it's coming, the influence of negative energies, the whole karma thing. It's been quite a ride.
It has. And it's important to remember that we've only scratched the surface of this topic. It's vast and complex. But hopefully this deep dive has made you curious and, maybe inspired you to learn more.
It definitely has for me. And I think it's safe to say that death doesn't feel so scary or taboo anymore. It's just another part of life. Something to understand and embrace, not fear.
Absolutely. And by understanding death, we can actually live more fully, appreciate each moment, and make choices that align with what we truly value.
That's a perfect way to wrap things up. I'm walking away from this deep dive feeling a sense of awe and wonder about this whole life-death cycle. And I have a whole new appreciation for how precious life really is.
That's great to hear. And to our listeners, if this topic resonated with you, keep exploring. There's so much wisdom out there just waiting to be discovered.
And remember, death isn't the end. It's a transition. What happens after is a mystery. But we can approach it with curiosity and an open mind. Until next time, deep divers, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep living to the fullest.